In this lecture, I'd like to discuss Nietzsche as artist, and also, I don't know if it's on what we might call the course syllabus, but Nietzsche and his political uses. And the two are deeply interconnected. I have said that I don't want to treat Nietzsche as a mere literary figure. And when I say Nietzsche as artist, I have in mind this strong project of self-creation, which is to make of one's own life a work of art. Very difficult thing is to sculpt oneself. It's much easier to sculpt in stone than to sculpt in that invisible, mysterious material of the self. So Nietzsche as artist is a complex figure, and Nietzsche as that complex figure has had complex and multiple uses within social and political discourse. And I suggested one last time when I discussed the work of Foucault. And also I tried to indicate how Nietzsche's view of power as macrological, as, in a sense, horizontal, cutting deeply into what used to be referred to as subjectivity, but which today would be referred to more accurately as the terrain of advertising. That account I tried to make clear last time. And I wanted one last example there before moving on. And I think that this one may have some political edge to it as well. And it has to do with the description, with whether we accept in a certain way descriptions that are offered to us by a culture that I have now begun, or I will now begin, to characterize as postmodern, or at least as a trajectory towards a culture that is postmodern. I mean, a pure postmodern culture is, for me, a strange and bizarre and unthinkable thing because it would have completely effaced subjects. So the subject of subjectivity would have dropped out, as well as the subject of things like Nietzsche would have dropped out as anything other than as, say, the labels for beer advertisements or whatever. So we don't have a pure postmodern culture in any respect now. We have one between modernism and postmodernism. We are in what Gramsci called an interregnum, about which he used as a word to describe periods in history where things are changing rapidly and people don't know what's going on exactly. And I think that's the kind of period we're in now. And about interregnums, Gramsci said, in them many morbid symptoms appear. And so it may be that Nietzsche here could help us as a symptomatologist of some of our more modern sort of morbid symptoms. One of them that I'd like to mention has to do with psychoanalysis and therapy, since it's well known that Nietzsche has been praised as a great forerunner of psychoanalysis. The original project of psychoanalysis, according to Freud, was that the id, or the it, the unconscious, unreflected parts of ourselves become reflected parts, become the I, the ego. That was Freud's project for psychoanalysis. Well, since Freud, I think we can understand that we're in what is now a mass culture which is thoroughly commodified. The role of that culture is what might be characterized and has been characterized by the Frankfurt School as psychoanalysis in reverse. Namely, that the parts of us that are reflected, self-consciously creating, become unconscious. Just sort of psychoanalysis in reverse gear. That the moments of lucidity and clarity we thought we had about ourselves are now to be filled in with stories that we pick up largely from the mass culture. Therapy now belongs, for me at least, to that terrain. And I have in mind all the various programs, projects, self-help books, 12-step plans, 10-step plans, fad diets, happy books, how to find your true self books, and so on. And I'd like to compare Nietzsche here with another theorist about whom I have a very high regard, and that's Kierkegaard. Kierkegaard's account of the self is in interesting ways like Nietzsche's, although more desperate in some respects. He may even be a more radical thinker. We may have to do a course on Kierkegaard eventually. But for Kierkegaard, and I think this might be true for Nietzsche as well, given his view of the self, the search for an authentic self is doomed in a sense to fail, because the self is these correlation of selves, of narratives, of stories, that, as it were, have to have a sort of origin from the creating aspect of you, rather than to be simply picked up as narratives from the mass culture. So if you've finished a 12-step plan devised by one of the lumpen intelligentsia, and by the time you reach the end of it you go, now I finally know who I am, you're in deep, deep doo-doo, because what you've precisely lost, according to someone like Nietzsche or Kierkegaard, is yourself, to the extent that it was even a constructed and interesting self. There's a simple Kierkegaardian reason why these pop therapies will not work. They cannot cure despair, because the self is a relation that relates itself to its own self in despair. The self, to the extent that it is at all, is a despairing relation, a deferred despairing relation. Now, Nietzsche puts a happy twist on that. It's a deferred, well, not happy, he's not that happy about anything. He puts a twist on it that the self is a risky relation to itself. But, my God, you can't be cured of what it is you are, and the person doing the curing isn't cured of it. I mean, you don't get cured of what it is that constitutes, because if you got cured of that, it would simply mean you don't have that any longer. The threat of a postmodern culture is not to have that deferring relation of despair at all, but simply some bland, banal smile at the end of a 10-point program and a nice 3-minute anecdote for Phil Donahue or Sally Jesse Raphael. A culture that picks its meanings up in that way is beneath contempt and beneath the level of civilization, I might add. Sorry, my view it is. It's beneath contempt. You cannot be cured of that despairing relation which constitutes what subjectivity is without being cured of something far more important, namely that very project, risky, dangerous, tricky project of subjectivity. So if you're out there looking for 10, 12-point plans, diets that will make you happy, exercise until you drop and cannot think, whatever various things the culture is offering in that regard, remember that it's the very object of this mass commodified culture is psychoanalysis in reverse, to give you some other story about yourself than the stories you're developing. Now, that, if you think you're mad, see, that may not be much comfort. You know, I'm mad, I need help, I'm insane, and unhappy. Well, sorry. Actually, madness becomes, at this point, I think, and in a culture like ours, maybe we should return to a sort of a feudal view of madness. In the feudal period, the mad were looked upon as having brilliant insights of wisdom, because they would say things that were outside the bounds of normal talk. And their sayings, as you may know, and this was true even in Greece, their sayings were frequently considered to be